Good morning to everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Nicholas Bornodis, President of Capital Inc., and I would like to welcome you all to Capital Inc. Shipping's webinar series. I am delighted today to host a webinar that will address one of the hottest and the most critical topics of the industry. We are going to talk about matters pertaining to seafarers, who are the backbone of the industry. And we are going to be discussing not only what is happening right now during the COVID-19 period, but also well beyond. We will talk about issues pertaining to seafarers and to the industry in general. The industry relies on the continued supply of well-trained seafarers who choose a maritime career, and our three distinguished panelists are going to address all these topics. I am particularly proud, frankly, to have with us today the three key stakeholders who are involved in the process of mandating what is happening regarding seafarers. So we have with us Guy Platten, actually, who is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping, Stephen Cotton, the General Secretary at the International Transport Workers Federation, the ITF, and Captain Belal Ahmed, Chairman at the International Maritime Employers Council, and Managing Director at the Western Shipping Company in Singapore. And he is also Chairman of the Joint Negotiating Committee that negotiates on behalf of employers with the ITF. I will very briefly paint the background of their organization so you can all get the picture of how they fit together and how they work together on matters pertaining to seafarers. So I will start with the International Chamber of Shipping. Established in 1921, ICS is the principal international trade association for ship owners and operators. Its membership comprises the world's national ship owners associations and represents about 80% of the global merchant fleet. ICS represents also ship owners at the various intergovernmental bodies that regulate shipping, including the UN agencies of the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and the ILO, the International Labor Organization. And ICS's overriding concern is the maintenance of the global regulatory framework for international shipping. If we go now to ITF, ITF has been helping seafarers since 1896, and today represents the interests of seafarers worldwide, of whom over 600,000 are members of ITF-affiliated unions. ITF is working to improve conditions for seafarers of all nationalities and to ensure adequate regulation of the shipping industry to protect the interests and rights of workers. It helps crews regardless of their nationality or the flag of the ship. Furthermore, it represents transport workers' interests in the various international bodies, affecting decisions that have to do with jobs, employment conditions, or safety, such as the IMO, the ILO, and so on. And now if we go to Captain Belal Ahmed, the International Maritime Employers Council, IMEC, is the only international employers organization dedicated to maritime industrial relations. Established over 50 years ago, it represents over 250 shipping companies located all over the world, and among its activities, IMEC negotiates with ITF on benefits which apply to ITF members and members of the joint negotiating group, which also includes Japanese and Korean ship owners. So here we have exactly the three main stakeholders: regulators, industry association, the unions, and the employers. So I will, without any further delay, I will hand it over to the panelists. I'd like to thank you and them for joining us today. Just a couple of housekeeping remarks. You are welcome to submit questions. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. There will be a discussion among the panelists, and then they will address your questions. And you can always come back later on at capitallinkwebinars.com to access the file as an audio or video archive. I will spare you for the usual disclaimer that this is only for informational and educational purposes. And that this, of course, webinar, as always, portrays the views of the panelists. So thank you to everybody for joining us. And Stephen, I will turn it over to you to kick off our discussion.
Thanks, Nicholas. Can I just say thanks for the opportunity to share an hour with the team to discuss what's happening with COVID-19 and the impact on seafarers. Perhaps it's also a critical time to look at what the future of the industry looks like. Such things as sustainable transport, the policy on emissions, what that means for the deck and engine seafarers, what it means for their education. I think it's also time, having seen the disruption to the world at large by COVID, to look at what's going to happen to the global supply chains and what should the industry be doing. And again, I will stress that, you know, this is an amazing industry, together to look for recruitment, reassuring seafarers that this is a profession, an industry they want to be part of. So for us in the ITF, it's a privilege. I'm going to go to Guy first, and then Bilal, and then we'll have hopefully a very informal but informative session. Guy?
Thanks very much indeed, Steve. So, you know, I think what we've seen over the last 3 months is a huge amount of cooperation between employers, between the social partners like ITF and with ICS as well, to try and tackle this crisis which we're going through. I think we can't move on to the future until we need to look at today and the 200,000 seafarers who are currently trapped on board ships waiting to be relieved, and the 200,000 waiting to relieve them. This has created a real logjam which really puts the global supply chain under threat unless we resolve it. Because, you know, we recognise they've gone the extra mile, and they've been working us to keep us all supplied, and we owe it to them. And so, you know, it's been a real focus of all our efforts and these unprecedented levels of cooperation we've seen to try and resolve this issue, to try and persuade governments that they may step up to the plate and facilitate crew changes, and to allow crew to go from their home to the ships and vice versa. And we know of so many seafarers who've missed out on weddings and missed out on the births of their children, and they've probably missed out on funerals of close relatives and loved ones as well. And there's a real mental and physical toll on them, and we really must work. But I think what I'd like to think is beyond that, is that once we get through these problems, and I'm sure together we will do, is how we can continue that cooperation. Because, you know, putting this COVID-19 just to one side for a second, our industry is going to go through fundamental change over the next decade or so. I mean, we talk about the emissions reductions, the greenhouse gas, which means that we're going to be looking at the introduction of zero carbon fuel ships, probably in the 2030s. We're looking at all the autonomous and digitalization that's going on at the moment as we speak. And yet at the heart of this all, the single most important factor will continue to be the seafarer. So there's loads of challenges as we move out of this, and there must be a fear, how can we continue to retain and attract the very best young people to come into our industry and to man what are highly sophisticated ships and units going forward. So it'll be a good opportunity maybe to reflect on this COVID now and what we can do more of, but also to use this debate to focus on the future as well. So thank you, Steve.
Bilal, would you like to come in?
Yeah, hi Steve, thanks. And thanks Nicholas for the introduction. Guy, thank you as well. I just like to echo what Guy was saying, basically, that this extraordinary crisis has brought all of us together. I have, at least my experience in the industry for more than 40 years, I have never seen all stakeholders coming together. And this is really unprecedented. And just echoing what Guy was saying, this probably one day soon, we hope, will go away. But this bringing us together event will help us to shape the industry for future. I think today probably, hopefully during this webinar, we can touch some of those areas where we can work together. Apart from just talking about coming together, which is a good thing, but the reason we are coming together is the seafarers. And again, talking about humanitarian crisis that is now turning into not just that, we are talking about a real impact on global supply chain. We are talking about real impact on shipping itself, safety, environment. When there is a question of shipping safety, we always talk about not just human life, but effect on environment. So we are all here together, but I have to bring up something that probably will feature later on, is when we say we are all together, I personally believe we still probably do not have some who should be with us together. I do believe that the end users of any voyage, which are the charterers, some of us are still not on board to assist the crew change. And obviously, our biggest frustration still lies with a lot of national governments who are still not opening up. I believe later we will be talking about how this can be addressed. And part of the webinar agenda is about post-COVID situation in shipping. And obviously that is looking at future, automation, changes of ship design. In fact, we may not be carrying some cargo 10, 20 years from today, and what the shipping is going to become. And COVID-19 has taught a lot of us about how the automation or the modern communication actually assist in being more productive. I'm quite sure some of this will not only be affected ashore, but also will be on board. So without much further ado, Steve, maybe we can go into the real discussion.
Okay, thanks, Bilal. So I just think tackling it from the COVID dimension, the ITF has been working tirelessly on seafarers' rights, but I think perhaps our industry is represented in policymakers, and underappreciated is perhaps the word I'm really looking for. And I think all of us have been doing our different tasks for some time, and we've built a very strong capacity to collaborate. We have different audiences, we have different membership, we have sometimes different objectives, but with shipping there is a sense of unity. Now, I think our biggest frustration, and again, I've been meeting Bilal and Guy for many weeks on a weekly basis, talking about what do we need to do next. And that conversation that Bilal identified about governments. So for whatever reason, we find ourselves in 2020 dependent on all parts of the globe to make shipping successful. But all parts of the globe are only serviced by effective aviation functioning, another part of ITF's job, and they're in serious trouble. But we haven't been able to get to the big decision makers. And we've collaborated on getting the message out, and we've attacked it from the supply chain, primarily because we want the world to know that it's the seafarers, that when countries were locked down, it was the seafarers and the ship owners, to be very fair, who made sure the ships kept running day and night, made sure that medical, pharmacy, drugs were delivered, medical equipment, personal protection equipment. Even, I'm based in the UK, the supermarkets seem to have been the only thing functioning effectively in the UK over the last few months, but that is on the basis that seafarers deliver the food. So I think for me, the big frustration going forward, and we want to comply with issues like zero emissions by 2050, is we need the world to appreciate what the shipping industry does for them. Whether you're sitting at the breakfast table or whether you're enjoying good quality food or wine, it's ultimately been delivered by ships and seafarers. So that's the first position. We need more governments to pay attention, and we're a bit of a critical moment. I think we all agree in the next 2 months, we must see a mass movement of these seafarers. And that means the labor supply countries, and India and the Philippines, I'm going to name as two that are critical to our success, need to help us get moving. But there's also this issue of the bigger picture, because I think we've recognized, certainly in the ITF, the degree of anxiety by seafarers who, it's a tough job. Many of the audience will be former seafarers, and I'm pretty sure the majority of you make your living from the industry. Now, the reality is we're not recognised and we're not heard, and we've had to work tirelessly from all of our different angles, us talking about the fatigue of seafarers, their desire to get off, the pressures on family. I think perhaps the most heart-rendering messages we get, Bilal touched upon it, is from seafarers whose family are ill or they've missed the birth of their children. And we always talk about technology, and this webinar wouldn't be possible without it, but technology brings the family life into the cabin, onto the ship. Now, normally, when you join a vessel, and more or less, when you get off a vessel, how do you explain to your young children or your parents or your wife or partner how you're when you're gonna be home? So there's been a lot of intensity, and I think the big issues that we now have are to look at what does climate change mean for us. We're going to hear, I believe, and I sit in a lot of different panels from all the different transport modes, that digitalization is going to help us with social distancing, the future of I don't really want to talk about automated ships today because I'm not sure that is a realistic proposal, but the skills needed to navigate a ship, the skills needed to manage the engine room with whatever fuels that we use as different parts of the world change the laws about emissions, are all things we need to discuss. And I think we will have to do a job as a group. And I think the question I'll pass around the panel is, how do we make sure that our industry is recognised as the backbone, as Nicholas put it, of the global economy? Because now more than ever, the global economy needs to kickstart and come forward. But shipping can't be left hanging for some governments to take some responsibility. So I think my first challenge back across the internet is, how do we get our shipping industry higher visibility? And what do we need to do to make sure that we retain today's seafarers and attract the next generation of seafarers where the technological skills may be even higher? I think I'm going to go to Guy first with that.
Thanks for that, Steve. Yeah, I think we sort of known as sea blinders, really. We're out of sight, out of mind on the ship. They just carry on delivering the supplies, the fuel, the vital things which have kept us going during the pandemic. I think we have actually managed to raise the profile of shipping quite. Usually it's only when there's a disaster that shipping gets into the headlines. But at least now, maybe this is a humanitarian crisis, but at least we're getting the point across that shipping moves 80% of world trade, that it's vital, and that actually shipping is an integral part of the recovery that the world is going to need. And so what we need to do, I think, is hopefully build on what the steps already made over the last few weeks in terms of getting that profile up there, but we need to do far more. And part of that is we also need to focus on solving the issue. And I do want to talk about the future, but what are we asking for? Because I see there's some questions in the Q&A box about that. It's more and more ports need to open up for crew changes. But what we really need to do is governments to firstly recognise and designate seafarers as essential and key workers. Rightly so, we've lauded and praised all the healthcare professionals who've seen countries through the worst of these crises, but seafarers have been there all the time doing that essential job. We need to make sure that seafarers are allowed to move unhindered between their home countries and their ships. We need travel restrictions to be lifted for them because they're essential workers. And we need some of those administrative features like visas and other things which need to be suspended, at least on a temporary basis, to allow them to get to and from their ships. And we also need to work with the airlines, with ICAO, with the international regulators to try and get commercial travel started. Essentially, since the middle of March, it's all but ceased, and that's been half our problem, is trying to actually, as well as the administrative type things, is to actually physically get the seafarers to and from the home. So I think that's something that we are certainly lobbying very hard for. I was very pleased to hear the United Kingdom are hosting a summit at the end of next week with like-minded countries to try and look at these issues and to try and get some real political traction. But I would appeal to any governments out there tuning into, what can you do to help us here now? Really classify seafarers as key and allow us to move forward. There's now, we say 200,000. Every week that goes past, that number increases. And we heard some of the terrible mental and physical toll it is taking as well. So we really need as an industry to come together. And to sort of segue into the future as well, is we need to promote shipping as a great industry, because it is one, so we can attract the talent going forward. And I fear one of the things happening at the moment is going to put people off from actually joining our industry as a career. The fact that you're doing 15 months on board a ship, which some people are, is not very appealing to somebody considering their career options going forward. So it's, you know, we've got to address that image of shipping as well, and then look about the focus on the future, and an exciting future it is for all of us.
Thanks, Guy. Bilal, would you like to come in? Can I throw out the first pretty challenging question from one of our captains out there, which is this issue of flag state and extensions. So it looks like it's just been announced that Panama, which has come under quite a lot of heavy criticism over the last couple of weeks, certainly from seafarers unions, about respecting the Maritime Labour Convention, which says 11 months in any 12-month period, an agreement to give a 3-month extension and a further 3-month extension. It looks from the note, and I haven't had a chance to verify it, that they're saying from the 22nd, from the 6th of July, that any extension is dependent on what we would describe as a repatriation plan. If I want to open that up to the panel, just add my 2 pennies worth before we go there. I think we called together the flag states, and we identified that it was a real challenge for them to be dynamic about this issue. Again, behind the scenes, we've had tremendous support from the team at the IMO and the team at the ILO, again, as our partners in this with ICS and IMEC and the J&G folks. I have to say I'm pleased with that. If that is a substantiated report, I'm extremely pleased that Panama have responded to the criticism. I think, just to pick up on what Guy was saying, I hope I don't take too much away from Bilal, you know, this puts the pressure back where it needs to be on national governments to open up their airports, and we are pleading with, and I would go so far, the ITF doesn't beg very often, but we're begging airlines to be available for flights, but we understand it's the government's jurisdiction to authorise commercial flights. Indian employers, ship owners, manning agents, managers have done a tremendous job on chartering flights, but that's not a sustainable solution. So Bilal, would you like to come in on that one?
I think you're on mute, Bilal.
Yeah, Steve, before I take where you left off, I just wish to add some comments from the employer side. We, as I had mentioned previously when we are talking among us, the employers are in the front line of this crisis. We recruit our seafarers, we train them, we are in touch with their family, we share their grief, and many a times, probably before they go to the unions, they actually come to us. And today, the shipping is complex. It requires people that are focused, that are properly trained, and it's very easy to make mistakes in a complex environment with a very minimum number of crew nowadays on board. So a lot of pressure actually comes to us. And from the beginning of the crisis, we have all tried to see how to solve the problem without making too much of a noise about it. And we initially agreed that certain extensions should be given. We discussed with ITF, and it was good to see that they had agreed. We requested for another month of extension, and that was agreed. And then we went for a 3rd month of, in a way, kind of extension, and still we could not get the real players in the global arena who could really untie the knot, which is basically the national governments, to allow the seafarers movement as a key worker. and obviously the airlines to run some flights. When situation reached at this stage, many shipping companies and probably some local organizations try to do their own charter flights, and we know it's a drop in the ocean. It's never going to solve the real problem. It is never going to solve the real problem. So we are very close to the seafarers, and that is why finally we have managed to exchange our views that we are all in this together in the same boat, and people really need to understand. I see one of the questions about Singapore, and I was closely involved in the Singapore working group. And when we talk to governments, and again, I do not wish to be negative about how each government works, but mostly we find the people responsible for the shipping side of any government are very sympathetic to the cause and to the crisis. But obviously, this is a health crisis, and the different ministries are involved into allowing the Ministry of Shipping or Ministry of Transport in different countries, how they will allow this request from the ship managers and ship owners and the shipping industry as a whole, how to allow or facilitate crew to move around from the ship to home and back on board. So these are the issues I believe that we still have not succeeded to resolve. So finally, as Guy was saying, we need to do flights, and obviously we need to do visa. That is, we know majority of the seafarers today come from Philippines and then India and many other countries where they can't move without doing visa. And I think ITF and ICS, and we have been working to get the main developed nations to, at least for a temporary period, to withdraw the visa requirement. Again, this is still a struggle, but some countries are opening up. The crisis, as far as we see, and as far as we, the stakeholders, could have done, now it has gone to the, shall we say, the ball is on the court of the national governments to really get into the act and do something. And I like to commend what the British government is trying to do to call this global meeting on ministerial meeting to discuss and find a way out of this. Yeah, Steve, I think that's at the moment from me.
Thanks, Bilal. Just trying to answer some of the questions about, I haven't got the percentage answers, but I can identify the nationalities. Certainly under ITF agreements, the Filipinos are very much in first place, whether they're operating on cargo ships or cruise ships. Second place for us would be India. Then it kind of goes in various different orders depending on cargo or cruise: Ukrainian, Russian, and Chinese. The question about labour supply, which has always been quite a controversial one for the ITF, I think it's kind of massively disappointing that we have formulas in nearly all of these countries. China's a little bit more challenging for us all, where we have bargaining processes, we have democratic, clear unions who are responsible for seafarers' welfare, we have good employers, and we have, you know, people that follow the rules. So we believe we have established good quality seafarers for the market that we have. Now the challenge is, if those governments, and none of us would challenge the right of a government to protect its citizens, but you know, when you shut down borders, this hasn't just gone for seafarers, it's gone for our truck drivers and transport workers in lots of sense. The consequences are enormous, and we've seen this, and it's very interesting for us. I should have mentioned that the UN Secretary General has made 2 pleas out to the governments of the world to get more involved. He asked us, through our global union representations in all sectors, to do everything to keep the global supply chain going. Now, you know, it's really easy to ask, but our industry's not regulated by one shipping company, and of course we really are a truly global, cosmopolitan, I would argue, equitable, fair industry. But when you can't get a decision made, and I think, you know, the question was there in one of the other questions about the log jam, as we would describe it, in Manila and India. First, we have to understand a little bit from the seafarers' perspective. So we have a crisis for the seafarers on board, but we also have seafarers ashore who haven't worked for, who are due to go to work 3 months ago, 2 months ago, 1 month ago, with no money to provide for their family. And in the Philippines, the seafarer provides for an extended family. It's not just like in the global north, sort of married couple and one child. There's a very big extended family. So we are impacting directly the economics of the country. The seafarers are some of the better earners. And so there's a real issue here about the stress and strain. So I suppose, without abusing the position, we are making a call out to the Philippines government, and challenging India is slightly different, to work out how we make sure we have daily flights out of the Philippines and back to the Philippines from the global hubs, the aviation hubs, because we really need, you know, they work very hard to become the #1 cruise supply country in the world. And I would argue that that's under pressure. We listen to conversations from the operators who frankly are as frustrated as my members and our unions, that some seafarers, we just have to get off of their mental well-being. There's a question about well-being, which I want to pick up in its own right in a moment. But the issue of some seafarers that are exhausted and just have had enough, and it's safer to take them off, and taking them off is one option if immigration will allow you. Another is to allow them to stay in their cabin. There are some contractual complications about collective bargaining agreement coverage, vessel in a health and safety moment, you know, a storm, etc. But you really, you know, seafarers are a team, and if part of the team is exhausted, the other part of the team either have to take extra exposure, but also we're not just risking the seafarers and the cargo of the ships. And I think this is a message to maybe the charterers out there that, you know, BIMCO and ICS, and I'll give Guy the opportunity to explain a bit more detail, have worked on a clause, but diverting ships is now going to become a reality if AMSA, which is the Port State Control in Australia, and I'm seeing it literally on a daily basis. Bear in mind, we get correspondence from seafarers every day, all day, every night. Port State Control inspectors are now under immense pressure. I'm here in Tilbury working on some cruise ships about extensions of contracts. We're working with a cruise company to find a solution. But they're under pressure to detain vessels to be in compliance with the regulations. So we've chased it and chased and chased. Now we need to get planes in the sky, and I'll let Guy come in on the BIMCO technicalities of what I believe is a good clause to help us out of some of these challenges. Guy?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's going to be a team effort. I think you pointed out that now. We're never going to solve it. Not one group is going to solve this issue. It's got to be, and that includes the charterers as well as the ship owners. I know doing everything possibly they can, ship managers. Everyone's trying to work together, and we need everyone to step up to the plate. So I was really pleased at the end of last week that BIMCO had a deviation clause approved and is out there. And I would really encourage ship owners and charterers to use that clause, because it does allow for deviations for the purpose of the crew change. It does allow the possibility of a sharing of the burden of that, which is really important. These things, you know, if you do have to divert away, they're not cheap, and you don't want vessels off hire at any time as well. So that's part of the toolbox now. It's getting, I think, Steve, you put the nail on the head, it's getting those commercial flights out of the major labour supply countries. That's what are going to be our focus as well. And at the same time, removing those administrative burdens. So we know where the issues are. It's now really shouting out loud and really trying to persuade governments how to take this seriously to help us with this. Otherwise, you know, the supply chain is under threat. There's no doubt about it. And I think what I find so frustrating is actually relatively simple to fix if people put their mind to it. We put together, with the whole industry, put together these protocols, these 12-step protocols, which the IMO issued out the 6th or 7th of May, which will give assurance to government that ship owners, ship managers, crew will look after themselves, leaving home to get into the ship to try and minimise that risk. I noticed someone's put in the chat box about an increase in COVID positive cases aboard ship. That again, we need to persuade governments it needs to be taken seriously. We need to be able to treat people that this happens to. This happens to as well. So we need governments to understand and work with us on the solutions, because this COVID-19 is going to be with us for months to come yet. And so we can't just put everything in abeyance whilst it works its way out, because that's not going to happen anytime soon. So we've got to now work together, teamwork, to make sure we have a sustainable process in place to allow crews to be changed and crews to be looked after as well.
Bilal, would you like to come in on that issue?
Yeah, I actually do like to. I mean, from my own personal experience, I can tell you, I have managed to get the crew off the ship, but then they're stranded because the scheduled flight was canceled, and we could not get another flight because flight just keeps canceled. So we have about 30 crew stranded after leaving the ship. This is one, and personally in our company we have at least 3 incidents where the charters, and these are big oil companies, threatening to off-hire the ship because there was a little bit of a delay with regard to the crew arriving and departing without realizing how much effort nowadays it takes for a crew to join. From the moment they are selected, they had to be quarantined, they had to be tested, and like we in our internal protocol, we require double testing before somebody starts traveling to join our ship. And all the governmental restrictions, flights. So we know how much it takes. So we really like to see that the major bodies that actually involve in chartering ships, involved in actually the product of the whole business. We bring the cargo from one port to another, and for them to give us this extra hand. So finally, we need to thank BIMCO and all the work ICS has put in to bring out the clause, and hopefully now we have a reference point to talk to the charterers on this issue. So this is something that I think is a good development, but I think we still need to see it is being followed or it is being accepted by the charterers. Another issue I think is very plain and simple for all of us to see. Not a single port in the world is closed since the crisis. Everybody wants the port open, but everybody do not wish to see those people who bring the ships to the port. They don't want them to go ashore. They don't want to have their medical attendance carried out. And I said a few times to my colleagues in the industry, my office in Singapore, out from my window, I can see 100 ships in the anchorage, and none of these guys are allowed to come home, even get off, forget going home. And the regulatory body in Singapore is just nearby, and they can see as well. When you see food on your table, your petrol on the car, and everyday thing that you see on the supermarket, and you don't sympathize with the people who are actually bringing those to us, it's really going back to the same old phrase, out of sight, out of mind, or whatever we call it. I believe that this crisis has brought us to the same old questions, that the seafarers are always working from the shadow and never getting the credit for moving 90% of the world's cargo. So I hope this crisis and those of us who are listening today will do from wherever we are to bring this thing, bring the seafarers in the front. We should be at the back. We should not be in the front. It should be the seafarers who are in the front. So I hope that the end users will see this and help us and bring enough pressure to the governments and the airlines to do something. Thanks, Lee.
Okay, Bilal, I think there's a number of questions around the detention issue, and that is a very sensitive issue. I think all three of us from our different perspectives worked collaboratively to transfer, to give ourselves the framework. Guy identified the protocol that's put in place. Then our unions, our employers, our counterparts nationally went into rooms, and you heard Bilal talk about the task force in Singapore, and I would put on record Singapore is dramatically improved. Hong Kong is improving. Korea has been reasonable all the way through. But again, we're talking about a global workplace, a ship with a global workforce, India, Ukraine, Philippines. If we can't bridge the connection, we can't solve the problem. We know, and ITF has a lot of relationships. We also represent aviation workers with the airlines who are ready to move. And we're at the stage where we believe this is now becoming a humanitarian issue. And that would take me, hopefully, to the well-being questions that are in the document. Detention is a method to get policy to change at government level. I'll stop there. It's a political issue, some of the flag states, how they've done it, but the recognition is actually that they're really moving, and we do appreciate that. But well-being, the ITF, I'm sitting in a Seafarers Centre in Tilbury that doesn't have any seafarers in because of the, we've had to fight with the reality. The ITF, first 6 weeks of COVID, put £1 million into welfare agencies to sustain them. So our colleagues from Stella Maris, Mission to Seafarer, all do critical work to join up seafarers and families and seafarers centres. So there's lots of secondary challenges, and we've been talking with employers about well-being courses for seafarers because pressure on cost, small crew, multicultural environment. So that for us, well-being is a very critical issue. And I think for me, when we talk about what does a modern future seafarer need, and if we, none of us would pass the ITF criteria for youth, so none of us are under 35. But the reality for the industry is we have to be attractive to young people, and we have to look at what skills we need, and we're going to have to look at the work-life balance and the career opportunities. So I'd kind of like to move the conversation a little bit into Guy and Bilal. What skills do you need? I know this will bring in the technology question, and if we're water propelled or ammonia propelled, how would we tackle that? So I think I'll go to Guy first, and then there'll be Bilal to come back on that pretty big question.
Thanks, and I think it's a complex issue. I think we need to make the industry more attractive. We also need to make sure we have a diverse workforce. It's not just down to countries; it's also down to gender and all these other things. I mean, my daughter's also a seafarer, and she's one of only, I think, 5 or 6% of seafarers around the world are female. So if we're going to move into the future, we've also got to make sure we attract everybody into the industry and not just focus on a particular narrow band as well. I think it's said at the start of this that seafaring is going to change over the next 10 years. We're looking at the ICS, along with others, looking to launch a research and development fund to really targeting the sea changing technology that's going to be required, the fuels and technology, and if it, say ammonia or hydrogen or some of these other zero carbon fuels, they're going to require an immense amount of training to make sure they can be carried safely and they can be used safely. And that's going to require increased training of seafarers. I think there is automation. I agree with you, Steve. I think the idea of an autonomous vessel completely is some way off, if at all, and that seafarers are going to be the backbone. But what sort of skills are seafarers going to need for the future? And I think we're going to need sort of a systems engineering approach. It's going to be a much more of a focus on that sort of side of the business, I think, for the seafarer of the future. And that then begs the question is, how do you make career attractive in terms of work-life balance and looking after their welfare going forward? I mean, this crisis has shown that to sharp relief. Is, you talk about a closed centre you are at the moment, and we know that happened right the way around the world. And these seafarer centres are vital in terms of giving that people an opportunity to get off the ship, to sort of contact home, and to get some necessary downtime. So we need to focus on all those aspects going forward. And I know ship owners have put on the extra mile to sort of increase satellite broadband bandwidth, to increase more internet access for crews, but it's never going to be enough. And as we move out of this, it's looking after that whole package of what's going to make the seafaring career attractive, but also in terms of that welfare aspect as well. It's now 2020, so in 10 years plus we're going to be operating new and different ships, and we need to start preparing that now and preparing the workforce of the future. Along with we're looking at changes to the STCW So that's a regulatory change we need to be, and that was meant to kick off actually this year, but that may be delayed now because of the crisis. But we need to tackle this whole issue on a wide variety of fronts. And you said something in the previous one about teamwork. The only way we're going to do this now, I think, is to us all working together to manage that change into the new future. If we're going to do it successfully, I think history tells us by working together we can achieve. If we work independently, it's going to fail.
Bilal?
Yeah, I think I just like to add what I had a little bit on my note about STCW. Relatively outdated now because the ships that is running nowadays are really already what we can call a smart ship. It mostly ends up the operators or the employers doing the extra training that is needed to manage those ships. So technology is not waiting for the STCW to make the changes. It is moving ahead. Ship owners are accepting technology that is driving the ship in a more automated way. Ships are changing, and we have to change the way we recruit the future seafarers, and how do we train them. And one of the things that we all know when we talk about automated self-driven bus, cars, trains, and we are not talking about automated ships, but we are talking about a lot of remote data access, which is already exist. We have some in our company where we do have access to the ship's data, almost everything, which means once you have the data, you can actually take over part of the work that is supposedly done on board. So in my view, probably in 5 years time, we are going to have crew not just on board, but some of the crew actually working from office. So how do we have that technology built into the crew who during their time when they're on leave, and then part of the time they will be in office doing part of the job that they were supposed to do on the ship. So those kind of changes, I believe, that will happen sooner rather than later. I mean, I just put an analogy. In Singapore, we have certain train lines which still uses drivers. There are others completely driverless, and we know those are not running actually by itself. The drivers are in a control room. So if we talk of future ships, that part of the engineering or part of the technological solutions that can no longer be done on board because of the complexities of automation and computerization, the solution is actually to be done from shore. So we are looking at future where what type of people we bring into the sea, what kind of competency, qualification, pre-qualification needed for them to become a smart officer on a smart ship. So things will be changing, and I believe that they are changing all the time. This means that the amount of funds or amount of money that is needed for future crew training is going to be exponential. I look back 30, 40 years ago, the amount of funds that ship owners needed to spend for crew training is probably nothing compared to what we do today. So industry is becoming complex, ships are becoming complex, and we need to keep an eye on this. And just taking over the subject of environmental safeguarding, that everybody's looking at ships polluting the world, which some of us may debate, because compared to the amount of cargo we carry, probably per ton or per kilogram, pollution is not much, but it is quite a large. And the way the industry regulators, IMO, is moving towards reducing the pollution, this is something that is going to happen again sooner than later. LNG fuel, I think, is something that probably we'll see more often in the future. And as Guy mentioned, hydrogen and others. But I still believe that shipping will remain the backbone of the global supply chain, and there is no way we can not focus on the people who will run the industry, basically the seafarers. So our view on recruitment should be radicalized within the next few years in order to have someone 10 years from today who will become a captain is recruited today with sufficient knowledge of what he is going to provide, what is going to be expected of. So the basic requirement of seafarers from the cadet level will have to change. So this is something, these challenges, I think, as a recruitment, as a shipping company, we are starting to address.
Thanks, Bilal. I think just from the ITS perspective, these are really big questions, and I echo the comments of both Bilal and Guy that we need to work together, but they're not uncontroversial in certain senses. Many of our unions, and this kind of take me into the conversation, many of our unions are ratings unions and are officers unions, and the challenge of a ship-to-shore education for the industry, I think, there's many different reasons why different nationalities have become the backbone of the industry, and there's many what we would describe as traditional nation seafarers who have not always been best pleased about those transitions. But the question is more about, as we see the world changing, and I believe we and the industry need to work much harder together, and we would support Guy's position about establishing a fund to deal with what do we need to transition the shipping in response of the environment. But I also think we need to have that conversation about what does the global supply chain look like. We speak to our seafarers unions and our other unions that we have seafarers unions, dockers unions, trucking unions. Well, whether we like Amazon or not at the moment, because they're not particularly friendly to unions, the reality is some of those big retail point-to-point delivery organizations are dominating our freight marketing. So there's a challenge for us. If we want to attract the right people with the right skills, we need to look at where they fit. And we talk regularly with a lot of the big container companies, and we see them moving inland, if that's the right way to describe it. We see them becoming involved in port operation and logistics, and I think there's a big challenge for us, not just on how do we propel ships, but how do we recognize that the global supply chain, I think, will change post-COVID. I think over-reliance on certain countries will come under the spectrum, government procurement, as we've seen over kind of some of the crises nationally for personal protection equipment. And we've talked to many multinationals that are more than just shipping companies that are now stockpiling personal protection equipment. There's going to be some changes coming as a result of the COVID-19. And there's still a few questions that we haven't seemed to answer, but in reality, we're not encouraging detention, but we are also recognising in the ITF, where we have partnership with the employers, we'll work with the companies and the port authorities to manage the situation. But if you are leaving Australia and you're struggling, there are ports in Asia, and that concept about the new BIMCO clause does help, hopefully, the charters share the burden. But in the bigger picture, there's a question for us about how do we look at our industry. If we look at a hiring labour methodology on a fixed term contract, which is kind of how seafarers are employed, that doesn't incentivise a career, loyalty, and those core issues. And as we see consumers' intelligence about whether it was climately friendly delivered, whether there was child labour, whether the international labour standards were recognised, there's some challenges for us about transparency. When I joined the ITF 27 years ago, it's a bit more difficult to say there are good employers, and the good employers are part of this panel and many in the audience, and that's the reality of change. But if we're going to shape our industry, which I'm incredibly proud to be part of, then we need to have a conversation about where do we fit and how do we get those people. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, Guy. Would you like to? I think there's probably one round left in it for us on this issue.
I think what we can be proud of as an industry is that I think we are the only global industry which has a minimum sort of standard for their workforce, the Maritime Labour Convention. I'm incredibly proud that we've got that, and we get a lot of criticism, and but actually the vast majority of ship owners are good employers, and they look after their crews, and they really want to have their seafarers to have long and careers at board sea, because otherwise it's a waste of money training people if as soon as they get their certificates they move. But also increasingly to make, I think we say to young people it's a career in our industry, not necessarily a career at sea, because I think there's a natural point where a lot of seafarers do come ashore and fill vital roles. I look at Bilal, captain, ashore. So I'm the same. I'm a master mariner, came ashore, and sort of a long career in sort of still in the maritime industry, but ashore. But I think we've got some things that we can be really proud of. But what we mustn't do is keep looking back. We need to look forward. And actually, to me, one of the real positives of this, and we've mentioned it already, has been the cooperation we've had. I don't think not just with social partners and sort of employers, but also with the regulators as well. I think I can't tell you how many calls I have each week with the IMO, the International Labour Organization, with the World Health Organization, and we've also been with a lot of the welfare organizations as well. And for me, moving out of this is how do we take all those really good cooperation that thing and use it to our advantage to plan for the future and to look at the future workforce that this industry is going to have, because it will have to, there's a question there about automation, will that discourage people? I think no, I think we can make this a really exciting future. You go on the bridge, I'm a deck officer, so I would be a bit biased. You go on the bridge of a modern ship and just see it bristling with technology. Now, if that doesn't excite a young person as to, and the ship operations as well, I don't know what can, but we need to plan that now and take what we've just experienced over the last few months and making sure that we help plan the future as a result.
Bilal?
Yeah, I think I do agree that technological changes that is happening on the ship has actually allowed us to go out, attract younger students to join the sea, and we have done some videos and some social media programs for the younger students to be attracted to sea, and they are coming on. And we don't have to tell them you have to stay at sea for 20, 30, 40 years. We just have to stay 10 years. That's good enough. And you can get back. And when we talk about ships are changing, which means you don't have to be on board 5 years from today to actually run a ship, because you could be a complementary crew in office in order to run the operation of the ship. So I think that is something that we can, not only we're not talking about selling it, we are talking about bringing the information to the younger generation. And post-COVID, and again, we know the employment situations around the world that has suffered so badly, and everybody's saying is never going back to the pre-COVID level employment. And here is again, could be another option for all of us to attract younger boys to join sea, because this is one place where there is a continuous shortage of seafarers that is there. So we could use you could use this shortfall as an incentive to going to schools, and not just on developing countries where they are providing the majority of the seafarers, but I believe in the developed nations as well, because this is the time. Is it better not to join a ship than to be unemployed, or than to be looking for a job and doing nothing? So again, these will require coordination among all of us here, and schools and colleges and the education ministries around the world, how we can attract young people.
So just to supplement that, I think the ITF has a very strong position on young people, and the International Labour Organization figures, together with the World Bank figures and the IMF figures about the consequences to our economies, is kind of petrifying from where I'm sitting defending good union jobs. And I think that the challenge, and I think you can probably hear quite clearly from the three of us, that we don't completely agree on everything, maybe not be so obvious that we disagree on some things, but the reality is this gives us a unique opportunity to redefine what is the future seafarer and what skills they need, and how do we balance the attractiveness of an industry. And I think the other thing that we should mention, and I should of course mention women as well, in the fact that it's critical, and we have a project to get more women at sea. But I think it's also a recognition that young people are internationalists. They relish being part of a global society, and I think COVID will do its best to shut borders and close our minds to maybe conspiracy theories, this and that. But for me, it's more about how do we make sure we introduce global standards that, recognizing that all elements of globalization are good, but it does help developing countries develop, and it does create employment and job opportunities. I hope governments will recognize post-COVID that there's a need for shipping, and therefore there's space for everybody in the shipping, irrespective of the size or the strength of your economy. So I think for me, it's really critical that we keep this continuity and cooperation going. And I think it's really critical that the noise we make in the world's media about the importance of shipping is carried out of the COVID period, and gives us an opportunity to be seen as second line responders. There's a lot of questions about why governments don't see seafarers as key workers. Where we bash the door down, they have, but they don't seem to have the internal decision-making mechanism to remove the obstacles. And that's, that can't be allowed to happen. And we need to get seafarers on and off ships, and we need governments to do more. I think, is there anybody would like to have some closing comments? I think Nicholas was going to come and close us down.
Yeah, may I? Just
yes, of course. I think I might have just done mine. Sorry.
Now, I think this crisis has put me into a lot of passionate verbal outbursts in many occasions. But I do believe that one of the reasons that I was interested in Capital Link's webinar to attend is I was thinking that probably we are bringing the message to a part of the world where somehow we, from where we are, feel that they're probably not as involved. But now I see the number of participants and the interest people are taking. I know there are a lot of questions that I can see. Probably we will take time to reply those. I don't know whether that is available later. Some answers probably will not be live. I think I have enjoyed what we are able to speak today. But what we need to carry from here is basically just a small message from us, is that we need to work with the governments to get some flights moving, even for a short period of time, to get this crew moving. Because when we spoke in March, we gave a figure of 200,000 seafarers that needs to be changed. And with all the trying and all the struggle that various people have done with charter flights, I don't believe we have done more than 40, 50,000. And every month we are adding 100,000 crew to be changed. So now if you think of 3 months, we have actually gone additional 300. And if you take 200, 500, we are again back to not square one, we are actually worse than that. So unless we clear this log jam, we really can expect some serious situation with global supply chain, and nobody wants to see that. And I do believe personally that the governments that are influential in the world, and we spoke about G20, G7, and the major governments, how they can influence the policy that is globally accepted. We know that the developing nations has their limitations with regard to what they can or cannot do. They cannot open the door for the Filipino government, cannot open the door for their seafarers to arrive in Europe without visa. So this requires intervention. And this requires temporary solutions. We don't need this to be permanent. So if we can bring something from this webinar, that how do we move this extra effort that is needed for the government to wake up. And once again, I hope that the British government's initiative with regard to the meeting they are going to arrange brings this message into that, and we have something done not later, but as soon as possible. And thanks, Nicholas, Steve, Guy, and all
Guy?
of you.
I'll be very, very brief, Nicholas, to say thank you to Capital Link and thank you, Nicholas, for allowing us to have a really good debate today. I think what is clear that seafarers are absolutely essential. We're so grateful for the work they do, and I think the world should be grateful for the work they do. We're asking ships around the world on the 8th of July to sound their horns again at midday local time to call out to the politicians that do something about this. So thank you all very much indeed. So, up to you, Nicholas.
Well, from my end, thank you to all three of you. It's been a very interesting discussion, very insightful, and this is one of the hottest topics in the industry right now. We have the key people.
Thanks, Nicholas. I think just to say thanks for the opportunity. I can't commend the fellow panelists on how hard we've all been working to get those decisions made, and it's just sometimes incredibly frustrating that we are unified in an industry. It's not the same in all transport industries, but it's difficult to get governments to recognise the critical situation we're in. So I think ours is a please, 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 all of you that are listening, chase someone that you can influence about shipping, and let's get those planes in the air and the seafarers on and off the ships. So thanks again.
And write to your governments, every single one out there, write to your governments about this.
Okay. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
To everybody, and just to remind our participants that there will be a replay available. So one of the good things about having an online webinar is it has a longer shelf life, and hopefully more people come to listen to this insightful discussion. Thank you very much. I think we can all now disconnect, and again, tremendous thanks to all three of you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.